What is the creepiest family secret you have discovered? After my uncle died of a heart attack a few years ago, it came out that he was the leader of a sex cult thing. His wife and 5 kids had no idea, and I think his wife is still in denial. Whenever his kids go to clean off the grave, at least initially, I don't think it's happened lately, there are usually sex toys on it that they have to throw away. Not super creepy but definitely a crazy curveball.
I don't mean to be insensitive regarding your loss, but what exactly is a sex cult?
Usually, a religious community with rules regarding sex much more lax. 69 points. My grandmother was addicted to those speed diet pills in the late 1960s and had a collection of wigs that she used to impersonate other people to pick up their prescriptions. Since this got so many likes, I thought I'd add to the story. She had gone through a lot in life by that point. Her mother died when she was 6, and her dad remarried 6 months later to a woman who used to starve her and only let her eat leftovers. She married at 17 to a man in his late 30s to just get out of the house. Her husband, my grandfather, committed suicide in 1961 when my mum was only 1 year old, leaving her alone with very little money and 4 kids. She had wigs because she lost her hair in the aftermath of her husband dying from stress. She still had them when I was a kid in the 90s, and I used to wear them for fun, although I didn't learn about their true purpose until a long dinner on a family holiday many years later. She told her entire life story from the start, and every detail has stuck in my mind. She stopped the pills cold turkey when she saw the police at the house of one of her neighbors, one of the women she'd been impersonating. It scared her straight. To look at her later in life, you would never have guessed she went through anything. The diet pills weren't even the end of it. She had a rough time with the menopause later on, got pregnant in the early stages, which then sent her a bit off kilter, and she was sectioned because she kept sticking her head in the oven, and the doctors didn't properly understand why at the time. She was the sweetest little old lady you'd ever meet, although she had a wicked dry sense of humor. All of my best memories growing up were with her. I was always the awkward weird gay kid, and she let me be myself, be creative, dress up. She was honestly my best friend. She died surrounded by her family in 2014 in her 80s.
My aunt is still addicted to those speed diet pills and travels over state lines to get them, 8 hours round trip, 4 hours in a waiting room. To be fair, she is overweight, but she's been on them for like 15 years and only takes them now to feel normal. It's pretty fricked.
My mom had me at 14. My father is a child rapist who was dating my grandma.
This is probably the worst one. Hope you're doing fine knowing this.
I'm doing okay. There was a period after I first found out that I was terrified I had rapist DNA that would eventually unleash itself out of the blue. At the time I had an offbeat little friendship with an 11 to 12-year-old girl whose mom lived in the apartment next to me. We'd play video games and stuff, and on rare occasions I'd watch her if her mom had some emergency, and basically overnight I became scared to death to be around her. But I had multiple people telling me that things don't really work that way, and in time I stopped worrying about it. And of course it was super upsetting knowing what had happened to my mom, but she basically said I was the best thing that ever happened to her, and she'd have gone through far worse things if I was the result. So with her putting it to me like that, I think I handled that aspect of things pretty well.
Your mom sounds amazing. Thanks for sharing the story.
A few years ago, one of my dad's cousins did one of those DNA kits. A few weeks later, she was contacted and told that there was several close relatives in their database that aren't listed on the family tree she made. It turns out that my great-grandfather faked his death in a life insurance scam and then started a new family on the other side of the country. He never got in contact with my great-grandmother or his children with her, my grandfather and his sister. It kind of crazy because he only passed away a few years before this all came to light.
My mom told me this over dinner a few years back like it was no big deal. When I was 6, my grandma, mother's side, wanted me to sleep over at her place for the weekend. It's noteworthy that she never really liked me. I remember her as a cold witch, 6-year-old brain. Her housekeeper was nicer to me than she was. My mom said no, she won't let me sleep over at her mom's. Granny got really angry, saying something along the lines of "You will regret this." So she didn't hear from her for a while and went to the house to check up on her. Granny had suicided herself with sleeping pills. Here's where it gets creepy. My mom found her diary and her last entry were things like, "Granddaughter, me, is rotten, needs to be killed, and it's her job to do so." My name was in her calendar for that weekend. Basically my grandma wanted to kill me when I was 6. I'm really glad my mom trusted her gut and said no to the deadly sleepover.
My grandma and her 9 siblings are very close. So when they each got a call saying a family member had died and they had inherited a large sum of money, they thought it was a scam. Turns out their very strict and religious father had a secret affair and an additional child, Marie. Well, Marie, now in her 80s, had passed away, so had her husband. They had no children. So the closest relatives were my grandma and her siblings. And that's how 10 religious people in their 70s and 80s learned their dad had cheated on their mom, and they had a half-sister they never got to meet.
OOF, that must really sick. Except for the money part. That would make me feel better about it.
I discovered that my brother and sister, which are twins, had sexual intercourse at least once.
That's some Lannister shoot right there.
Ah, the things we do for love.
My dad once found a mummified human foot just chilling in a trunk in his basement. My grandfather was an orthopedic surgeon who was stationed in New Guinea during World War II, and by all accounts was never quite the same after the war. Our best guess regarding the foot is that it belonged to one of his patients and either had some sort of abnormality my grandfather found interesting, or he was just super proud of the amputation job he did. My dad and his buddy, who were 12 or 13 at the time, naturally decided that the best course of action was to hang the foot from the front porch of the girl they were crushing on. And apparently no one in town batted an eye over it, other than thinking it was a good prank. And that, kids, is how I met your mother. That my grandpa was a drug addict and was eventually cast out of the family. My aunt woke up one night to find him in the house talking to a real estate agent. He snuck in and tried to sell their house while they were asleep. He also double mortgaged their house, so he got basically all my nan's income. When my nan tried to move the family away from him, she realized she had almost no money due to this. Bank director said it was okay because men are supposed to control the bank account. She was stuck there because of him, and he was leeching off their money, and there was nothing she could do about it. Both sides only have to sign if both are named as co-borrowers. Often, only one spouse signs, and that was probably even more common in the past. My grandma had 6 children. I always thought my oldest uncle looked and acted different from the rest of the siblings. When I was 24, I found out he didn't share the same father as the rest of them. But that isn't the juiciest part. His real dad is my grandpa's brother. Uncle Father Oscar. That's called a funkle.
My grandfather had a little crazy aunt who lives in the attic. His father's sister had some sort of mental illness, and they were apparently worried about how that would look for the family, so they locked her in the attic of his boyhood home Jane Eyre style, and basically just kept her fed and otherwise ignored her. I found out about this when he briefly mentioned it a few years ago, like it was an entirely normal thing to do with a family member.
That is unbelievably cruel. My father's parents both died in the 90s. Around 5 to 10 years ago I did a 23andMe test, mostly for kicks and to look out for any health issues. Last year I was contacted by someone through the service who was trying to find blood relatives because both of her parents had been adopted as infants and we had a pretty strong genetic connection. Long story short, my grandfather had an affair in the 1950s and fathered twins. My aunt and uncle were pretty floored to find out they have half-siblings. My father died 4 years ago from suicide, so he never knew. To get even weirder, my mother grew up with these twins after they had been adopted. She was friends with my father's half-siblings decades before she married him.
Wait, so she went to school with them or knew them from her neighborhood?
Yep, she went to school with the twins and they lived nearby. Small Catholic world in those days.
That my aunt, my dad's sister, had an affair with the brother of her husband, and when he found out he hanged himself, and after his death, they both harassed the wife of the brother so much that she drank poison and died. They live happily ever after. P.S. English not so strong, sorry. Edit, just to make it simpler for everyone, aunt is A. A is married to husband, H. H has a brother, B, who has his own wife, W, so A sleeps with B. A is cheating on H and B is cheating on W. H finds out, hangs himself. A and B torment W, who is B's wife. She kills herself too. Now both cheated on partners are dead, and the two cheaters, A and B, live happily ever after.
First of all, your English is pretty good. Second, the frick was that?
Then mine must be bad, because I have read it several times, and I'm still not sure who is alive, who is dead, and who harassed whom.
Like, comment, and share. Reddit Story Topper. Subscribe now.